I'd like to welcome everybody to today's meeting of People and Culture Committee on the 9th of December in the Galdano room of Avon and Somerset Police Headquarters. We have apologies from Councillors Massey and Varney today. Any other apologies?
I think Councillor Monk is just running a bit late.
Yes. So the next item is the emergency evacuation procedures, which Assistant Chief Fire Officer Welch will give.
Thank you. There is no fire alarm plan for this morning, so if there is a need to evacuate the room, then we will direct you to the assembly point if necessary.
Thank you. And declarations of interest? I don't believe we have any.
No, none advised.
And no public access statements have been received?
No.
Excellent. Let's do a round of introductions. So I'm Councillor David Wilcox representing Lockleys, and I'm Chair of People and Culture. So if we go around that way for...
Ruth Jacobs, Weston, Wick St Lawrence and St George's. Does it work?
Hi, Councillor Brian Hopkinson, South Gloucestershire Councillor for Cribbs and Chorlton Hayes. Thank you.
Richard Tucker, North Somerset, Western Supermare, Milton Ward.
Councillor Shelley Bromley representing Western and Bath and North East Somerset Council.
Don Davis, North Somerset Council, Peel Ward.
I think that's it for members. So should we do officers?
Richard Welsh, Assistant Chief Fire Officer.
Democratic Services.
David Roberts, Fire Brigade Union.
Amanda Mills, Fire Brigade Union.
Good morning, everybody. Group Manager Crevetto representing Learning and Development.
Good morning, Richard Stokes, Diversity and Inclusion Manager.
And finally, I'm Karen Shield, I'm the Head of Human Resources.
And Amanda Brown, Clerk to Avon Fire Authority.
So can I have somebody to move the minutes, please? Thank you, Shelley. And a seconder. Thank you, Richard. Actually, so can I have a votes against, and votes any abstentions, and votes for, please? Thank you very much. And the next item on the agenda is the HR and recruitment update, please. And Karen Shields is going to be giving that.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm understanding that you've all seen the papers and had opportunity to read prior to today, and the papers are also available on the internet should anyone want to see the papers from the members of the public. I've broken my paper into 5 sections today, and I'll go through each of them in turn and then take any questions that you might have afterwards. So the first part of the paper is around whole-time recruitment. As you will recall, at the last meeting, I updated you on the progress following the campaign for this year. You'll be pleased to note the campaign has finished, and we're starting the next recruitment campaign shortly. The next training school starts on the 6th of February, and I've given you the diversity profile for the 24 new recruits that will be joining us. We have 22 male and 2 female candidates. I'm glad to say that the one that was outstanding medical check has now been completed, and they will be joining us. And also 5 new recruits from underrepresented ethnicity groups, and I've provided the breakdown within the paper. You will recall previously that we've done quite a lot of positive action and community engagement over recent years to try and increase the diversity of our workforce. That is very much still work in progress, both for us as Avon Fire and Rescue Service and also as a national issue for all fire and rescue services. What I've been doing over the last few weeks is working with our HR team and also with our corporate communications team to try to push back the recruitment as far as possible so that we can allow sufficient time to do more community engagement. So since I've wrote this paper, it's been confirmed that we will launch the next recruitment campaign on the 10th of March, and that will allow us plenty of time during January, February and early part of March to do community engagement activity. That includes face-to-face contact with members of the community and also with some of the community groups that we work closely with, namely SARI, Babasa and various other groups. And also doing mentoring with people that maybe applied previously and were unsuccessful in our recruitment campaigns so that we can work with them and help and support them and get them ready for the next campaign launching. That information is provided openly to every single member of the community, but we focus also on underrepresented groups, just to try and make sure that, as we've discussed previously, some people may not think that the career in the fire service is available to them, so it's just working with them to try and make sure that they understand what is available to them, what that career really means, and also any potential barriers. So we're constantly looking at the recruitment and selection campaign and making sure that we remove any unnecessary barriers to help people progress through that selection process. The next item on the paper is around industrial action planning. You may be aware that the Fire Brigade Union nationally had a consultation ballot recently to seek to understand whether people would be willing to accept the pay deal, which was increased to 5% recently. That unanimously was to reject the pay deal, so it was 78% voted against the pay deal, and a formal ballot was launched this week. It closes on the 30th of January. And so obviously at this point in time, we don't know whether industrial action will take place. If it does, following the result of the ballot, that will be taking place between the mid to end of February next year. So obviously we have a duty to ensure we can maintain our statutory response to members of the public, and therefore we're been prepared to start launching industrial action planning over the last few months. So we've been recruiting and selecting a number of reserve firefighters, control operators, drivers and team leaders, and these are being trained and recruited at the moment. Our aim is to get around 80 firefighters, 30 control operators, 20 drivers and 20 team leaders to provide the cover that is required over that period. And obviously I'll update you further in the next meeting as to the result of the ballot. Third item on the paper is around corporate staff recruitment, and you'll remember previously that we've spoken about both the issues that Avon Fire and Rescue Service has had around recruiting to some of our specialist corporate staff posts, but also this is a national issue, not just for the public sector but also for the private sector. At the time of writing this report, we had 10 vacancies being advertised for corporate services teams, and we're working very much with recruitment agencies and with other organisations to try and generate interest in those vacancies. We're also doing a competitive salary review to see how we perform against other public sector organisations in the area. Obviously, what we need to consider is our budget. Obviously, if we have a pay deal that is accepted for the Fire Brigade Union, that is going to cost a significant sum of money that needs to be funded by each individual fire and rescue service, and it's balancing what we could then afford to pay in terms of increased salaries to attract some of those high-risk corporate services vacancies. So people like IT managers and those sort of things where the market is very, very competitive, but it's stopping us from doing some of our important work because we maybe haven't got the expertise and the skills within the organisation at this point in time. However, what we're also trying to do is to consider to sell the benefits of working for Avon Fire and Rescue Service and some of the non-cash benefits. Again, we've spoken previously about competitive annual leave, pensions and other provisions that we have, flexible working and hybrid working, to try and generate more interest in our vacancies. So it's very much ongoing work in progress, but it's just to keep you updated that there is still a risk that we do still have some of our vacancies which we're struggling to fill. The fourth item on my paper is around staff welfare. We had a competitive tender process which we joined forces with other fire and rescue services in the southwest and also with Kent Fire and Rescue Service. We tried to work as efficiently as we possibly can in terms of procurements. We did a regional exercise and we've appointed a new occupational health contract with a company called Health Partners. That came on board on the 1st of November. And the benefits are that we can increase the number of doctor and nurse provisions that we have and also look at maybe having mobile occupational health units so they could go out on fire stations and where sometimes we've been behind in delivering routine medicals, which are really essential to make sure that we've done that. With the pandemic, it was quite difficult to do that because we weren't able to do face-to-face medicals for a period of time. The new occupational health contract will allow us to catch up with that, and will also, particularly for on-call firefighters, that if they have to book unavailable and attend a clinic, not only can it sometimes have an impact on the provision that we can provide to the community, it also means potentially that they're not earning money and they've got to sort of come to a clinic and that travel time can take them quite considerable amount of time. If we can have a mobile unit sited on those stations for a day, that can mean that we can do 5 or 6 medicals all in one day and they can still be booked available to attend to an operational incident if needed. So that will give us some real benefits in terms of that provision. It will also enable line managers to do referrals for the first time. And what we've talked about in other forums and also in this forum is around attendance management and how it's really important for welfare that line managers are continuing to support their staff if they're off sick. So this will be something that line managers can do those referrals and have a closer link with people, particularly if they're off long-term sick. Sometimes it's felt that that's been an HR responsibility, which of course we have a shared responsibility to providing welfare support for our staff, but it's really, really important that people feel that they're valued and that they're contacted by their line manager. And what we hope is that that work, and we'll be training those line managers to make sure that they can undertake those tasks in the early part of the next year. We've also replaced the counselling contracts. We've had a really successful counselling contract with a company called Red Poppy for a number of years. Unfortunately, they lost the tender this time. We've gone for a company called Workout Solutions. There are some cost efficiencies around that, but that wasn't the primary reason for selecting that organisation. They can offer additional hours, whereas Red Poppy was mainly a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 provision. Workout Solutions offer a 365-day a year, 24 hours a day cover. So particularly for our operational staff that work shifts, if they need support on a Friday evening at midnight, they can access that support which wasn't available to them previously. They would have had to wait to say Monday morning at 9 o'clock, which often can cause some difficulties. They also have a number of specialist counsellors, including cognitive behavioural therapy and something called EMDR, which is a really good recognised treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's something that we're in the process of communicating to all of our staff to make sure that staff know about those additional provisions and how to access those. So that contract actually comes on board from the 1st of January, but we've started the communication process now. So we've got a seamless transition from Red Poppy through to Workout Solutions. We've also got a physiotherapy contract, which we've had in place for quite a number of years. Again, the current provider, which is a company called PhysioNet, was not successful in the tender process, and we've gone for a company called Rehab Plus. They've got about 22 clinics in around the Bristol and surrounding areas, and we're just working with them again to launch the new contract from the 1st of January. And this is for people who either have had an injury on duty or outside of work, or experiencing maybe back pain or lower limb conditions where they can go and access funded physiotherapy treatments paid for through Avon Fire and Rescue Service to either help them to return to work sooner or to prevent them going off work sick. So it's like a sort of value added piece of work. We obviously with the NHS, that provision often isn't available through the NHS, and if people have to pay privately, that's something that not everybody can afford, particularly at this time of sort of economic sort of pressure on cost of living crisis, etc. Then finally, on my paper is around cultural improvement work that we're undertaking, and you'll recall both myself and Richard have spoken extensively about the work that Avon Fire and Rescue Service has been doing to help improve our culture and to look at the outcomes from both the HMI inspections and also from our previous culture surveys. We've replaced the bullying and harassment policy with a new policy called Dignity and Respect. We've consulted extensively with a range of stakeholders across the organisation, and that policy will be launched shortly. It will be launched before the end of December. That will be supported by a toolkit and communication and training plans to make sure that everybody in the organisation understands the importance of that policy, how to access it, and how everybody has a role to play in being an ally to people if people are experiencing any kind of inappropriate treatment within the organisation, that they know who to go to and how to source help and support. That policy is a sort of suite of papers that's available to staff around our cultural improvement plan. It links to our service values, our behaviour framework, which is also out for consultation at the moment. That has been in place for a number of years, but we've just recently had a contact this week to look at with our senior leadership team to look at refreshing our values and behaviour framework. So is it still fit for purpose, or is there some additional work that we need to do to make sure that is truly embedded within the organisation? This work also links into the National Fire Chiefs Council core code of ethics, and it's about making sure that is embedded and understood amongst all of our workforce. We're just launching a new range of senior leadership team visits, where the senior leadership board and members of the senior leadership team visit every single workplace to talk about a range of topical issues, and obviously culture will be one of those that we'll talk to, and also about the bullying harassment policy, about why we've replaced that with the dignity and respect policy, and how each and every one of us has a role to play in making sure that Avon Fire and Rescue Service is a positive place to work for everybody. In support of that, a zero tolerance statement has also been launched, and that will be issued, I think, this week by the Senior Leadership Board. That has been consulted with the trade unions, including the Fire Brigade Union, Unison Unite, and also our staff engagement network. This complements our discipline and dignity and respect policies, and further work will be done in January to revise the discipline and grievance policies to make sure that they remain fit for purpose. The Senior Leadership Board have been heavily involved recently in reviewing some of our recent cases, and also making sure that we take a very robust stance on those that fall short of the standards of behaviour that is expected. Zero tolerance sometimes is misunderstood. That does not mean it's one strike and you're out. It's about trying to train and educate and talk to people to make sure they understand what is good behaviour, and not to walk on by if they see anything that they believe is wrong, that they tackle that, and that managers at every level in the organisation help our staff to address those things at the root cause. So ideally, within the station or the workplace or department that occurs, rather than it escalating. But the Senior Leadership Board are very on board in terms of looking at the sanctions that we award. We've talked about that previously in our meetings when I gave you an update on the cases from the last operational year and around the consistency of sanctions, and that's something that the board are very keenly involved in, making sure that we learn any lessons from the past and that we review all of those cases and the actions that were taken. And that's it from my paper. I just wonder if anyone's got any questions.
Can I just for the minute say Councillor Monk has now arrived? Any questions?
Councillor Hopkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. That was a really fulsome report, thank you. Some of you may actually know that I did actually bring up the situation with the possibility of why or could you put in some fire cadets, because from the point of view of recruitment in later days, that could well actually benefit the Fire Authority, as well as actually putting some education into young people's hands in relationship to the way the Fire Authority, the whole being of the Fire Authority works, and being the right sort of person, having that sort of diversity, etc., in there. Simon came back to me at the last one of the meetings, and we discussed actually trying to get some funding just to sort of break it up, to try and actually help. I think some of the officers on the training area would like to be really involved and to get something happening in probably beginning of May financial year. What I tried to do is I put a request out, as probably my colleague over there knows, to try and get some of our what I call MAF money, which is basically members allocated funds, because I thought I could actually raise 20,000 without too much problem. But I've actually raised a little bit, but not that much. A lot of members were concerned that if Fire Authority happened in their area, would it actually make any difference? Would there be any thing for them specifically? I think they were thinking, not in the blue sky thinking as I was, but more sort of very local to them. Was anything going to happen in Yate? Was anything going to happen here? So questions need to be answered, but I'd just like to really see this actually happen. I mean, we've got Army cadets which really work. I know people that have actually been in the Army cadets, and they've actually gone into the Army. They've had some brilliant careers, I mean some really good careers, and also in the Air Cadets. And I think the Air Cadets is recently recapturing part of Filton, I think, my colleague knows that, to try and get in there, even though we've not got an airfield, which is interesting, isn't it? We're going to build in some new buildings, etc. But I just wondered if if you've got any feedback on that at all, or if you've not been, has it sort of come past you at all?
You've caught me on the hop a little bit, I'm going to admit it. I haven't spoken to the Chief recently about his plans for the cadet scheme, but that's definitely something I can do. What we do is, obviously, as you may recall, all of our firefighters now are on an apprenticeship scheme. So when they start to the first iteration this year, the 48 firefighters that we took on this year are on a firefighter apprenticeship scheme. We work very closely with Western College on that. We also are working very much with young people across all of our communities. So Rich has particularly done some work with Babasa. We're also looking at work going out to schools. We've done a huge number of schools, community engagement, to try and get young people interested in the role and to invite them out onto fire stations and to do more. Some of that work, again, stalled a little bit with the pandemic because it put some restrictions on what we could and couldn't do. Now that that is pretty much over in terms of the face-to-face, we're sort of reinstigating that, and we're going out to lots of schools, careers events, etc. So I agree with you. I think it's really important to engage with young people. What I need to pick up on is what the plan is for the cadet scheme. So I can definitely get that information to you and email elected members if that would be helpful. Unless Richard.
I absolutely agree that I think the idea of fire cadets is of great benefit to the organisation. I've had quite a lot of experience with the fire cadets in the past, and I think it also can help for our recruitment and diversity within our recruitment, and ultimately it's a great way of reaching out into the communities. I think the issue we have at the moment is the initial setup cost is quite, as you're aware, is quite large, and then the ongoing costs aren't as bad. And with the financial restraints we've got at the moment, and with the impending industrial action, and with the outcome of the pay offer, obviously that will tie our hands to a certain extent. But personally, I'd be absolutely happy to try and drive that forward and discuss that with Chief Forester further to try and develop that idea once we get out of this sticky period.
Richard, I mean, two things here. Everybody's constrained and strapped for cash, etc., etc. And so there's several ways of looking at it. What Toby Savage, who's the leader of South Gloucestershire Councillor, came up with some ideas about other places. I'd already thought that if I couldn't get the MAF money, then I would try and go out to industry, local industry, to see what we could do. Again, it's going to come back as an answer. Well, is this going to be wide, right the way around the Avon Fire Service? Is it going to be only in South Gloucestershire? Whatever it is going to do as a business locally, how are we going to do it? So I need some extra feedback on this. I've also spoken to our sort of youth sort of club department in South Gloucestershire. I'll put it that way because it's got different titles, but in reality, they've got funding and they can actually get extra funding. And so and they're quite willing to have a meeting with you guys. And also Toby Savage is quite willing to have some kind of meeting. He was quite very keen on something happening. And I said some of the councillors have actually, I think most of them actually really want something to happen. It's just that we've got elections coming up next year. Every councillor gets £3,000 allocation, which doesn't spread a huge amount to different areas, but in reality, we could have actually, if everybody put in like 500 quid, that would be an awful lot of money.
Councillor, can I suggest we take the detail offline? Is that all right? So for the minutes that we agree to come back to you to discuss any funding opportunities, because I think that's what we're talking about, is funding opportunities.
Anyway, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Karen. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? Shelley?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much, Karen. Just thinking about the industrial action, contingency plans, because obviously it's a problem to recruit into the service anyway, in many ways, and to cover some of the roles. I just wondered how that's going to be achieved then to meet statutory obligations.
So it's going quite well at the moment. Obviously, what we're not doing is training people to be firefighters. This is just to provide defensive firefighting cover. So for control operators, we've done really well. We've got 30 staff, so we've pretty much closed now the advert for control, and all of the training is taking place and will continue into January. The same for drivers. You all know there is a shortage of LGV drivers nationally, but also in the southwest region. We're working with a recruitment agency. The legislation changed in July this year, and for the first time ever, recruitment agencies can provide resources to cover for strike action. So they are working with us, and we've got, I think, about 16 drivers at the moment. So we've only got a few more to get, and the training is happening, and one of the training courses took place this week. For firefighters, we're doing really well. We've got, I think, about 27 who are already fully trained. We've got about another 40 odd in the pot who are going through the process at the moment. The difficulty we're having is around team leader role. So that advert is being circulated, and also with the military, because obviously people need to have a certain level of skill and experience, and ideally with dealing with operational type of incidents. And so that's very much what we're working with military and other organisations to try and help to fill those vacancies. We've got really the rest of December, January and early February to get all of those filled, and we can obviously make sure elected members are updated on our progress.
Thank you, Karen. Okay. Let's get one more question, David. So the second question was about the impact of the reports on London Fire Brigade, and if there were any sort of lessons to be learnt within the fire authority here, or if the situation's rather different.
Thank you. Obviously, the culture review in London Fire Brigade's very front and centre at the moment. It is relatively new as far as landing on our desks. We're very cognisant of the findings out of it, but obviously following our own last two culture surveys, we're on our own cultural journey with that. We will be going through the London Fire Brigade review and the findings, and finding anything that's really is applicable to Avon. But what I'd like to do is probably update you more on the next meeting, really, on that, because it is still quite early for us to make any definite comments around that. Is that right?
And just to add on that one, just in case you think I've maybe omitted to put this in the paper, unfortunately, because of the way these papers work for this committee, is this had to be written 3 weeks ago and submitted. So actually the LFB report came out after this paper was written. So that's the reason why it isn't included within this report. But I'll definitely provide a full and thorough update to you at the next meeting.
Thank you, Karen. And I've got one last question I'd like to pose on this one. Can the zero tolerance statement be shared with members when it goes out, please? Because I'd be very interested to see it.
Absolutely. We'll ensure that's circulated to you.
Smash it. Thank you. Any more questions before we move on? Excellent. Thank you very much, Karen.
I think that report was just for noting, so no need to vote
So
on
we're
that.
noting that one. The next one is the Avon Fire and Rescue Ethnicity Pay Gap, which is presented by Richard. And at this point, I'd also like to say that I'm very happy that you've been nominated and shortlisted for the Most Influential Ethnic Minority Award in the Excellence in Fire and Emergency Awards, Richard. Congratulations.
Thank you. Okay, so the ethnicity pay gap for 2022. This is our second report to the Fire Authority on our ethnicity pay gap. Just a little bit of background. Since 2018, that was when the first Office of National Statistics decided to present ethnicity pay gaps across the country, nationally. And since 2020, organisations have been voluntarily producing their ethnicity pay gaps, and that includes ourselves as well. Just for knowledge, the pay gap for ethnicity is calculated the difference between the average hourly earnings between white British and other ethnic groups. For us, as Avon Fire and Rescue Service, we use 4 categories. That's being white, mixed, Asian, Asian British, black, and all the groups under those, and other ethnic groups. From this category breakdown, we have reported a pay gap of 5.65% between 2021 and 2022. This compares with previous years. Last year it was 4.28%, and the previous year was 8.2%. There is a number of reasons why we've seen a slight increase in this year's pay gap. The fact that we have a very small amount of ethnic minority staff within Avon Fire and Rescue Service, it is subject to any changes or in staff, especially up at senior levels. Any changes, any new staff coming in will actually cause a spike in the figures. Certainly in corporate services, the appointments of a number of new staff at senior level have created a slight increase in that pay gap. And also when we did a deeper dive into the operation or firefighters, we also found an increase there due to movement within the actual operations as well. So that's people getting promoted or people leaving as well. We are obviously continuing to monitor that pay gap, and as Karen mentioned, our work around recruitment and the community, presenting Avon Fire and Rescue Service as an employer of choice amongst those underrepresented groups. So we're obviously promoting that and trying to obviously increase the amount of ethnic minority staff within the organisation. The other difficulties around producing this report is the confidentiality. The numbers are so small that people are easily identified within the reports that we produce internally. And we are working with the performance unit to find a better way of categorising or using the categories on our reports, so that we obviously keep people's identity confidential. In the future, we're going to be looking at the age factor, as reports have shown that within age groups, especially in terms of gender, older women perhaps there is a disparity there in terms of the pay gap. So there will be more analysis than just the straightforward figures that we're producing today going forward in the future. Just to make a note in terms of the report that I've produced, under financial implications, I have put there is no financial implications. Just want to make the point that that actually relates to the paper, not in terms of the organisation. So to address any understanding around that, the fact of having a pay gap in the first place implies that there is a financial impact for the service, and we're actually working towards reducing that in the future through our initiatives that are within the DICE strategy and also within the culture change action plan as well. So that's something we'll be working more closely on in the future. Very short update, but any questions at all?
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Davies has a...
Thanks for this, Richard, and thanks for the information. I mean, I guess the most important paragraph for me is on 5.10, in which the paucity of national data is saying that it's really quite hard to know where we are with this. And I think you do identify for me the issue around this, that the sample sizes are so small, and the ability of individuals to feel they are being identified through that small sample size, I feel is in some ways a negative point. And actually, in terms of the cultural journey we're on, I'm not sure how helpful these statistics are, because it tends to imply there is an issue which is there, but could be deemed to be greater or less compared, as you say, by one or two people either joining or leaving the organisation. So, though we have the data, my concern is around people's ability to analyse statistical information with very, very small sample sizes, and though we might bemoan Ofsted, they do exclude often in their league tables, whatever they call them, when they get really quite small schools, because of the ability of individuals to be identified through the performance, but equally how useful is the information coming forward, because the numbers are so small, and one child being absent for the day may skew positively or negatively the numbers. So thanks for doing this. I think it's important we do, but I just want to make sure that we are being very careful in the sense we may explain to people the sample sizes are small. There are the issues around confidentiality, which I think is probably my biggest single concern personally, and just to treat this with the level of caution that it needs to be used. Yeah. I wouldn't want negative headlines to come out of this, which actually would probably make people feel very disappointed. And actually, because one person has left or one person has joined, and it is that. So, sorry for the sort of statistical examination, but I do have a level of need for caution on this. Yeah. But thanks for doing all the information.
If I may, I think that was very useful to get those comments from Councillor Davies. Can I say that I think the organisation's decision to print this information is upon the premise that it may be introduced as a statutory requirement, so we're sort of getting into the habit of doing it before we're forced to. So I think that's the thinking behind it, but I think your comments are really, really valid. It's really helpful for Richard and the team. Thank you.
So, So just to sort of finish off then, and sort of going on your comments, Councillor, in 5.8 I've mentioned across, nationally, organisations of having issues with actually gathering the data first of all, whether people actually want to put down the relevant or correct information, and that's not just for pay gap, that is even just for diversity monitoring anyway, so that's a key issue. Also with things like statistical robustness, other business burdens as well is a key issue there. I think for Avon Fire and Rescue Service, the numbers are so small in terms of the pay gap itself, but the actual overall numbers of staff within the organisation compared to the majority is really small. And for me, the most important thing is to increase that first. When we get more numbers in, then actually we have a proper analysis on a pay gap that actually means something, especially at middle and senior levels as well.
Thank you. Richard. Does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Hopkinson?
Yeah. I think it's a really important issue, to be quite frank with you, and I appreciate that studies have been carried out on the gender pay gap, which is quite difficult to sort out to make sure everyone's earning the same money if people have got different jobs. And it was, in fact, I think, a situation where a lot of in some places ladies did certain types of jobs and males did some types of jobs, and then effectively then you've got a situation where there was an ability to differentiate between that type of job and that type of job, and then people get more money for that job and not that job, etc. And I think that is changing dramatically, which is really good. I think Tesco's and a lot of other companies have done this. I've employed people, and I've had a situation where I want to make sure that people get paid fair pay and things, and then everybody gets the same money, and then somebody that's actually a leader in their area and actually takes on more responsibility gets more money. And I would have thought somewhere along the line that there is a system within the fire authority where everybody gets the right money for doing the right job. If that's not the case, and you can point the finger that people are discriminating on certain things, then that's the area where we should be looking, surely. So I'm not sure, does it actually, because the thing is, if you've got to actually go down and ask people questions individually about things, but surely it should be looking at the top down from the people who are paying the wages. Because there is a situation where people get qualified to a certain level, and they should be then on that money. So I'm not sure how this is actually. This is sort of complicated to me. Could you explain why? Yeah, thank you.
Well, the ethnicity, the fact, the two pay gaps, that out of the two, gender is the easiest one. It's binary. It's male or female. With ethnicity, you have, as I've mentioned, we use 4 key categories, but actually at ONS level, there's 18 categories. So it's the breakdown of all those different eventualities, or in terms of how people identify themselves, so that you could have 3 different ethnicities in one. And the question is, do our systems actually are they able to record that that complexity? And probably not is the answer. So we can only rely on what information people give us in terms of data. That is a key issue anyway, and it has been for such a long time. The questions usually are, well, why do you need to know that information? It doesn't matter whether I'm married or gay or whatever, as long as I can do the job, that's the main thing. So we haven't even got over that as, in terms of gathering data. I understand, it does sound complicated. It is actually complicated to gather this data because of the amount of splits, the amount of breakdowns, and how people choose to identify. We can only learn from best practice from other organisations, and that's the stage we're at the moment, I'm afraid.
Councillor, could Karen Schill, Head of HR, just because I think your question related to grades and where people are paid for the work they do, I think Karen can deal with that.
Thank you, Clark. Just to reassure elected members, everybody who enters, maybe as a firefighter, is paid the same rate of pay. The same for corporate staff. We have a HEY job evaluation system which looks at some of the issues that you've raised around like work, equal value work. So we look at jobs around the skills, qualifications, knowledge, decision making, and all of those different factors to make sure that if a traditionally male, I think you're right, I think it is changing. I think society and luckily the job market has changed, but those traditional jobs that maybe were more likely to be done by men. So, for example, at our Nova Way workshops, technicians, mechanics jobs, there tend to be more men. But we look at those roles and we map them across with other roles that might be, for example, station cooks that are predominantly female, to make sure that we've got the same level of pay and the same decision making. And that analytical process is one that's held up in tribunals to say, actually, that shows that you've got a justification for like work. Some of the issues that I think Richard was is talking about is also around our promotion process. We have less diversity. As we go up through the ranks, we have, or the roles within corporate services, we have less diversity, less women, less, particularly on the operational side, less ethnic diversity. So those are some of the things that we're working on. Richard and I work really closely together, and also with our colleagues in our learning and development team, because it's not just about people putting themselves forward for promotion, it's around how we identify talent and how individuals identify that they are talent, and that we're not always recruiting the same type of person. So we have to look at our promotion processes and make sure that if there are different skills that people bring because of their difference, and that might be male, female, it might be ethnicity, it might be a whole load of other factors that make people, equally good to be promoted, but sometimes people don't always put themselves forward, particularly sometimes if they're in a minority group. So some of the work that we're doing with managers, as part of our appraisal system, is to make sure that line managers are appropriately trained to identify and have those appropriate conversations with people, because we recruit some fantastic people with amazing skills, but sometimes they don't put themselves forward for promotion. So that's some of that additional work that we're doing, which I hope then will be borne out in our future gender pay gap and ethnicity pay gap, that actually then we will start to see that difference reflected at every level in our organisation. Does that help to answer the question?
Yeah, it helps awfully, enormously, because the thing is, there's been work done to try and actually find out what these percentages are, and then that becomes a driver to make you try and achieve it even more so. So I can now see the whole thing in context. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Councillor Bromley, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Well, it was just actually, Richard, a similar question to Councillor Hopkinson, really. So, but, so if people don't feel they have the confidence to apply for promotion, then I think Karen was saying that managers can then sort of have, actually actively encourage people to put themselves forward when they maybe didn't have the confidence to do so themselves. So I think that's what you're saying, isn't it?
Thank you. Councillor Tucker?
Just very quickly, Chair. I suppose it's in many ways a lot of this is keeping pace. It's just trying for us as an organisation to keep pace with the changing demographic within the country. Obviously, we've had recent data statistics out, and obviously looking at our own local data within the county of Avon. So I suppose it's always going to be a changing picture. And I think as long as we're making proper efforts, and I think we are, that's obviously a positive message to send out to people. But I think these things will probably play through in time, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, for your report.
I think this report was again just for noting.
So we'll note that. And next up is the quarterly training report, which Matt Cravetto is giving. Thank you.
Good morning, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me today. As my peers have conducted, I'll summate quite quickly where we are, and then open to questions. I'll start with key considerations. A member of this group in the last meeting raised concerns around breathing apparatus coming out of date and requested a 6-month back and an accurate track going forward. Please accept my apologies on that of the department. Where we're on such a rate of change and change in relation to scope and pressures being placed on the training team with the industrial action planning, we were unable to give you accurate data that isn't changing day by day, and to timestamp it at the point when this document was created would have given you a full sense of where we currently are. I have data accurate as of yesterday, and I'll talk through that and present that to you where we are. Again, I hope you understand that those extraneous pressures that didn't exist 65 days ago are now affecting us, and we're having to work around them. So breathing apparatus qualifications. Currently, we have had to, due to the change in scope and work pressures placed upon the training delivery team, cancelled 7 breathing apparatus courses, which has affected between 70 and 84, depending on how many people would have turned up on the day, which we can't actually accurately count. This has meant that where we had planned to get rid of the backlog by the end of November, we will be looking at the end of this month for the 31st a projection of 41 members of staff out of date, and by the 28th of February that will extend to 68. The team currently, as yesterday, has planned to implement an extra 2 breathing apparatus training courses over and above the 5 which are long-term projected, which will reduce by 29.4% the overall total from 68 down to 48 and provide a level of security there. What is happening within the operations arena, which is held by the area manager operations, is a risk-assessed profiling of every individual that is out of date in relation to their ability to underwrite from an organisational point of view extension beyond that 2-year legal framework. That will be done on a case-by-case basis and provide a level of security to the organisation whilst we take the industrial action planning and training from reactive to business as usual. The industrial action training, leading on to, is affecting learning and development, 2 significant teams there, and the teams have set up a number of training events to upskill and educate those members of staff that Karen's team is engaged in bringing into the organisation, and that covers driving, the firefighter equivalent and the team leaders. The range of courses that we're providing will cover a few areas. Firstly, testing and selection. We have to ensure that candidates are capable and able to do the role that they are asking to do. They'll be provided 3 days initial skills course, continuous development days, a 3-day breathing apparatus initial course, and a 3-day initial road traffic collision course. It's important for yourselves as members to understand that not all employees that we bring in will have the full suite. They will be selected. So drivers will receive driving, the firefighters will receive the firefighting, the team leaders, the team, so that they won't be multi-skilled, they'll be directed. That list will be maintained and passed from learning development to Karen's team to ensure that those staff, when we bring them in, are allocated positions effectively and provide that level of assurance. In relation to the ongoing training and business as usual that training delivery has been conducting, I can confirm now that Phase 2 tall building training has now finished, and that being the Phase 1 was the initial input of theory. Phase 2, walk-through practicals. We're now progressing to Phase 3, which is live training at full speed, for want of a better descriptor. Severn Park has completed an on-call training school, and 5 new staff have been taken and placed on the run at their respective stations. There's another course finishing at the end of this month, with a further delegate should pass out from that course, and there is a second course running behind that now that should see 7 new entrants into the organisation by the end of January. A whole-time apprenticeship-led training school will start on the 6th of February and run for 14 weeks, and we have, as Avon Fire and Rescue, 24 delegates assigned to that course. If I move on to hazardous detection and identification and monitoring, the driver training unit has been engaged with retraining a number of new officers within the organisation to drive that asset. We've had a number of staff leave, and there's a shortfall gap there which we're overcoming. There is a number of exercises being planned for next year to test our preparedness against a chemical, biological, radiological or nuclear event within our area of operations, and that is a multi-agency event that will test many assets and skill sets within our organisation, and again they are listed within my report. You will have all noticed that since the last update provided to this committee, Manchester has released its Phase 2 emergency response findings from the Manchester Arena incident, which leads us into the marauding terrorism and malicious threats piece. We are retraining and looking at upskilling those teams. That means that the Hicksgate provision, 3 out of 4 teams have been retrained and upskilled. We have just finished this week a ballistic PPE overview and assessment, and that audit and uplift is ongoing in relation to PPE to prepare us for that marauding terrorist action response. Technical Rescue has conducted a number of months of tidal boat operators courses to ensure that we are compliant with the new rescue boat code as released by the National Fire Chiefs Council. I was assured that by the end of October we have thus far trained 31 rescue boat operators, and this should be rising now to 53 total. That will allow us to provide that coastal piece along our coastal border, where before we were restricted to inland water only. Technical rope rescue. At the moment, the technical rescue is provided by Temple Fire Station in the middle of Bristol with support from Southmead. An upskill of Hicksgate station is happening so that they can become team members. That will provide resilience to our line access level 3 responses to those threats within our organisation. The team at Hicksgate was chosen because they are level 4 operators, so they actually have a high level of training, and they've been taught the one that's slightly lower so that they can integrate better. That's ongoing, and that should be on the run by the time we next meet. A memorandum of understanding with South West Hazard Area Response Team, the HART, as provided by South West Ambulance Trust, has been drafted for rope rescue working so that it becomes seamless, or more seamless, and less reliant on dynamic decision making. That is awaiting sign-off. We've talked about water rescue. Heavy rescue, all heavy rescue instructors were refreshed recently at the end of August and beginning of September, so those assets are up to date. Organisational development under Liz Marchant. We currently have 47 firefighter apprentices within the organisation, and they are off the last 2 recruitment schools. They are now all with their assigned watches and stations, and they each have an assessor applied by Western College that comes out and interacts with those individuals and supports their learning. Liz's team and the organisational development team visits those stations and individuals regularly in order to support their apprenticeship process and to support the management teams that are looking after those individuals and overseeing their day-to-day function. Western College then delivers 6 weekly update sessions, which include things like conflict management and self-awareness. The list, again, is within the report. From engaging with the apprenticeship scheme, the organisational development team is building a pot of money that they recoup reciprocal money, and that's being used carefully to filter back in supplementing and complementing organisational delivery learning throughout the organisation. The team under Liz is now looking at corporate apprenticeships opposed to just the firefighters, which is where we've targeted so far. And they are, as organisation, we're starting to find difficulty in filling skilled places. And an example of that would be workshops. Trying to recruit into that with skilled work is tricky in the current marketplace, but the apprenticeship scheme is looking to support HR in backfilling that and provide solutions to it. The personal development reviews. At the last meeting, you were informed that the personal development review system was going through to SLT. That has now happened, and the funding for that and uplift has been agreed. We are keeping the same provider. We are increasing the functionality within that system, and next week we should be producing an advert for a corporate member of staff to work within mine and Liz's team to implement that effectively within the organisation. What we will see is a huge amount of functionality that we haven't had before, and it will allow us to effectively integrate learning holistically into an annual appraisal process. Promotions policy has recently been revised to include a process for control staff. There is some long-term work which is going to have to happen in this area in relation to what we need to teach control before we assess them. That's ongoing, and I'm working closely with that team to ensure that that happens. There is plans to launch a leadership academy in April 2023, and this will allow us to identify individuals within the organisation that have the potential to be extremely good leaders, and to identify them and to support them through at an early stage that career progression piece, and to encourage that nurturing of talent. This investment will hopefully ensure that we're getting the right people in the right place and with the right skill sets. If we move on to operational assurance, this is a new area of the report. Learning and development has taken under its umbrella my team, operational assurance. And in relation to this, the Senior Leadership Board agreed a £300,000 one-time uplift in funding for my team to pump, prime and proof set a concept around how we will deliver our work. We are engaged in 4 key pieces of organisational business. The first one is operational guidance. The national guidance piece for firefighters has changed significantly over the last 6 years, which is being now underpinned by significant changes and direction from the national fire standards. We're also involved with operational learning and ensuring that we learn from what we do and that we engage in a wholesale organisational learning and reflection on what we produce on instant grounds. We're also leading and evolving instant command training and developing a 4th methodology of learning within the organisation called fast operational learning, which allows us to react faster to emerging threats or to information changes or from our learning. The policy that supports that department is in the final stages of its negotiation and should be live early next year. A number of supporting processes that sit under that policy are being drafted, and we're looking at a more combined approach. Operational guidance is recruiting for 2 extra staff as part of that uplift to ensure that we finalise and finish off our adoption of national operational guidance data. And what we will be doing before the end of December is rescinding all our operational policies so that we fully are engaged and aligned to the national operational guidance set, which is a requirement of fire standards and is national best practice. We currently have 49 operational information notes, which are local pieces of Avon Fire Rescue specific data, which are out for review, but due to constraints within the organisation, they are on a time frame for completion, which has been extended. A key example of those operational information notes is the work that our team L&D wider has engaged with operational staff and the Fire Brigades Union to focus on and radically change our behaviour in relation to fire and instant contaminants. That has started with a contaminants working group organised by the organisation, where learning and development and operations fed into that, with identified members that have either Fire Brigades Union interest and direction or a personal steer, and it's allowed us to create a better response and to reduce the impact of fire contaminants on our staff. The process of this has taken a while. Internationally, the data for this has existed for some 50 years, and now we are aligned to the shower in an hour policy, or process that the FBU has underwritten. We are conducting clean cab policy, so that we are not sitting on vehicles with contaminants on our kit. We have invested heavily in equipment to clean breathing apparatus sets post-incident, as opposed to them staying dirty, so that it's an industrial level of cleaning. And we have also, as an organisation, re-engineered our frontline fire appliances so that that equipment doesn't have to be kept in the cab. Does that make sense? Which is a key piece of work. Operational learning at the moment. So learning from operational incidents is operating with 0 staff, and a recruitment process is underway to fill vacancies in that team, but we are still able to respond to key risk, and we have conducted operational debriefing against the 3 significant incidents since our last meeting: Twinnell House, Eccleston and the Grosvenor Hotel fire. Those have been processed, and the learning outcomes are now within the organisation and running through their function. Instant command training is ongoing, and currently we only have 11 members of staff that are out of date for their command competence. These will be reassessed as part of an ongoing process, and even though we are engaged in producing the team leader qualification for the industrial action firefighters, we will still be able to maintain that business as usual whilst delivering there. We've delivered a station manager's managing incident course. Those individuals have now been assessed and have been informed today of whether they are successful or unsuccessful. And that is the summation. That's the summation of my report. Any questions, councillors?
Thank you, Matt, for that full gamut of information you gave us there. Thank you very much. Councillor Bromley would like to come in.
Do you want to have the FBU first?
Thanks, thank you, Matthew, thank you. I just wondered what 5.20, heavy rescue, I don't know if you could define that, or is that 5.21? What is heavy rescue exactly? Could you explain?
Absolutely, Councillor. Avon Fire and Rescue Service, I think, can proudly take the position where we are leaders within the sector for heavy rescue. And heavy rescue is vehicle extrication, or the release of entrapment of casualties from vehicles that are larger than a domestic car. So we're talking about buses, articulated vehicles, heavy goods vehicles, and agricultural machinery. Heavy rescue then becomes very technical. The equipment becomes larger to perform those extrications, and the skill sets that sit behind applying those tactics becomes far more complex. If we consider, for instance, a very simple car, even though cars aren't simple, and compare it to something like an articulated tractor unit, the understanding and knowledge that those individuals, our operational staff, need to have to make sure that that area is safe to work in, and that we can make those emergency responses effective and release those trapped people, is an increase in understanding, knowledge and capability above what we have traditionally as a sector provided. So heavy rescue for Avon Fire and Rescue Service, we have 4 rescue pumps at key stations, so Weston-super-Mare, Avonmouth, Templeback and Bath. Those vehicles have larger equipment compared to equivalent fire engines around the country, and certainly when we compare to other organisations, that allow us to start to attack, is the word I want to use, that we use colloquially. We can attack vehicles that are of a larger size. And then Avonmouth is our specialist heavy rescue station. They have a dedicated standalone heavy rescue tender, which is a vehicle that carries our largest equipment, and that allows us to operate with effectiveness and efficiency on the substantial route network that we have within Avon Fire and Rescue Service, and within that wider industrial agricultural context that we operate within. So heavy rescue is anything bigger than a car, up to aircraft, trains, everything. Okay.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to invite the Fire Brigade Union to speak if they want to contribute to this, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon now. My name is Dave Roberts. I am the Regional Health and Safety Coordinator for the Fire Brigade Union, based here down in the southwest. First and foremost, I'm a proud firefighter down in Exeter, down in Devon. I'd like to take this opportunity to speak to you this morning with regards to contaminants. You've just heard the group manager allude to the working group that Avon Fire and Rescue Service have set up, which is fantastic to see a forward motion in this area. If I can, by way, just give you a brief introduction. So, for the last 3 years, the Fire Brigade Union has been working with the University of Central Lancashire, basically to understand the link between fire contaminants and cancer, therefore protecting firefighters and their families. In countries such as Canada and Australia, the link between firefighting and cancer has been researched and has been proven. Therefore, firefighters there will have a greater degree of protection from contaminants. So again, bearing this in mind, the FBU decided to approach a world specialist into fire toxicology, Professor Anna Steck, who works out of the Central Lancashire University. And this was to carry out the first UK major study into cancer and fire contaminants, so that we can make sure that our firefighters get better protection. Since this research has been carried out, the research team has investigated rates of cancer and other diseases in UK firefighters. They're trying to understand the long-term health effects of fire contaminants and toxicology, and basically to provide recommendation to reduce exposure to contaminants in fire and rescue service work. When this research was concluded, it was debated within the House of Commons, within the Environmental Audit Committee, and they made a quite explicit, they gave quite explicit direction that the HSE was to monitor the progress of the FBU's research and provide assistance in implementing the recommendations which seek to improve the working environments of firefighters. The real underlining and the real strapline of this is firefighters are 4 times more likely to get cancer than the average working person. This has been linked directly to contaminants released during fires. The slight irony in this is that most of the toxic effluents which are released during fires are byproducts of the flame retardancy, which we saw applied to furniture, etc., in the back of the 1970s to prevent people dying in fires. So as we all know, contaminants, they can be inhaled, they can be ingested, they can be absorbed through the skin. Skin absorption of fire effluents, it increases as body temperature increases when we go into a hot fire. Contaminated kit, dirty gloves, helmets, it's those things which are quite often overlooked within fire stations to go through a thorough cleaning process. They re-expose firefighters on a daily basis. And this is borne out by the evidence that skin, head and neck cancers are more common than average in UK firefighters. So furthermore, in June of this year, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, or IARC, they met to finalise their evaluation of the, bear with me on this one, the carcinogenicity of occupational exposure as a firefighter. So now occupational exposure as a firefighter was classed as carcinogenic to humans group 1, based on sufficient evidence provided by the UCLAN report. Avon Fire and Rescue Service are to be commended for their proactive approach that they have taken to this foreseeable and preventable risk. The education, the procedures, the monitoring and the recording will all contribute to a changing culture leading to a healthier, empowered workforce. The HSE, as I'm sure you're aware, Assistant Chief, are taking a keen eye on this through the National Fire Chiefs Council. And we've also heard today, we've had some talk around financial pressures that have been applied, but this shouldn't be of this should be no excuse for losing momentum on this very, very pressing issue. We've also heard today about potential industrial action and links to pay. The industrial action is also twofold. We're actually lobbying ministers as the FBU to try and find a sustainable, fully funded fire and rescue service in this modern day and age for future firefighters to come into. So that really sums up what I would like to say to you today. I thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, I will try my best to field them.
Thank you. Councillor Monk.
So I have 2 questions. The first question is, you referred to fire retardants that was added to furniture back in the 70s, so I understand that. So are those products still used? So because the point I'm trying to understand is, I heard the risk, and that's quite shocking, 1 in 4, but is that risk diminishing as that furniture becomes less common, if you see what I mean, because the new products are introduced? And then the second question, and this is not trying to be argumentative, do you feel Avon Fire Brigade should be doing more to protect its members than it currently is? And if so, what would you recommend we do?
Okay, yes, thank you for those questions. So the first one, any man-made coating applied to provide fire retardancy in its latent state is absolutely fine. But when you then change its molecular structure via the process of fire, we get all sorts of organic compounds and inorganic compounds which can be released. So this is something which isn't going to go away overnight. So we have to be very live to this. So your second question
was what should Avon
yeah, sorry. So I sit on national health and safety meetings through the Fire Brigade Union, where a lot gets reported in. And so I'm taking quite a subjective view to this. Yes, Avon Fire and Rescue Service should be doing more, but they are doing considerably more than other fire and rescue services. Now, I don't want that to sort of like give you some level of complacency that we're doing. We can always do more moving forwards, and we completely appreciate the financial constraints. But from what I've seen of the evidence from the working groups, the approach seems to be pushing in the right direction. But yes, always more can be done. But like I say, on balance, Avon are moving in the right direction.
Thank you for that. I believe the head of HR would like to come in on that as well.
It was just to add to that, in terms of something I should have mentioned earlier, in terms of the occupational health provision, part of the medical process that our firefighters undergo is what they call health surveillance. So the doctors, we have the same contract now as Devon and Somerset, and also Dorset and Wiltshire, I think Surrey, Sussex, Kent. So a lot of us use the same occupational health provider. So there's also a network of doctors. I don't profess to be a medic, but part of the health surveillance is looking at lung function of firefighters and also skin tests. So doctors do a face-to-face test on firefighters normally every 3 years, although there is some work being looked at as to whether or not the frequency of medicals needs to be less. And also for those firefighters that have a greater risk of exposure, so what we call hot fire trainers. So for example, some of our training staff that go into hot fire containers on a more frequent basis, they have an annual test. But what the doctors are doing is working with the National Fire Chiefs Council, is also looking at actually sometimes it can take many, many years for these things to become apparent, quite often when firefighters have already retired from the job. So there's a sort of group of doctors that are looking at this to look at, is there anything different that can be done in the health surveillance, and just to work with sort of the groups that's working on the contaminants, just to share that knowledge and try and to make sure that all fire services are doing as much as they can with the medics to make sure that firefighters are obviously educated and aware, but also that we identify at the earliest opportunity if there are any potential indicators which warrant further medical testing. So I just thought that would be something that maybe elected members would like to be aware of.
Any further questions? Adam.
Thank you for that information, Karen. So, I understand we're testing employees every 3 months and trainers every month, every year, sorry. Be very expensive to do every month. But our responsibility doesn't end when somebody retires. So what happens to retired members of staff? Do we offer that facility, or do they have access to that facility?
We don't currently offer it. It would then default really to the National Health Service to do those tests. What we try and do is, obviously, when firefighters have left, often they remain members of the Retired Firefighters Association, and often the Fire Brigade Union as well share information with them. So it is definitely a piece of work that we could do more around, in terms of just making sure that our retired staff, particularly those that retired many years ago, are aware of this work. So I think that is a joined up piece of work that we need to do. Very occasionally we also get personal injury claims in, so even if somebody has retired many years ago, if they have unfortunately had a cancer which may be linked to their occupation, then that we also get involved. Obviously one could argue that that's too late, but it is around that education piece and making sure that from the date that they retire they still have access to that help and support, but the actual interventions would be done through the National Health Service.
Sorry, Dave Roberts. So just to add on to that as well, the piece of research that the FBU commissioned, obviously it's looking to protect in the here and now firefighters within the UK, but we're also looking to try and get presumptive legislation for within our sector. So if you contract cancer throughout your lifetime, and there's already been specific cancers which have been linked to firefighting, then potentially it will be presumed that there is a direct occupational link. So therefore, any litigation would potentially would be linked directly to the occupation as a firefighter.
Yeah.
This basically puts sort of like pressure back onto the Fire and Rescue Services in the here and now to make sure that it doesn't occur in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, a bit like we saw with asbestos, sort of like back in the 1950s and 60s.
Adam, do you want to come quickly back in and take...
Because Amanda's going to have a heart attack now, because I'm sure legally this is probably not good advice. So, I recognise we're not doing anything for retired staff, crudely. So, given there is a potential link, should the fire authority be writing to, and there's probably GDPR reasons and all reasons why we can't do this, but conceptually, is there any reason why the fire authority doesn't write to a retired member's GP to advise them of the potential link to cancer, so therefore that they are flagged that they should be screened somehow through the NHS, rather than waiting for the person to develop symptoms, at which point their chances of survival have decreased because there's already symptoms rather than being pre-screened. And I accept that you're probably opening yourself to all kinds of litigation.
There's all sorts of issues connected to that, which I think are better taken offline. So, for example, I don't know whether we'd even hold the data to be able to do what you're suggesting. So if we could take that offline, because what Karen and I have noted down has said that we are considering more work in terms of awareness work with retired firefighters. So I think that is something is probably more achievable. So if we could take that offline, and then perhaps we could give you an update directly, if that's okay. Thank you.
Councillor Bromley and then Councillor Jacob.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair. I just wondered really, how do you assess these risks then? If you have all these different incidents and, for example, a vehicle fire or something, I mean, it must be very difficult to know the level of risk a firefighter's facing and therefore precautions other than breathing apparatus, which, I mean, does that offer some protection? I just wondered, generally the assessment of risk, really.
Yeah, so a lot of research has been done into this, and you're absolutely right. So the wearing of BA will protect our respiratory tracts, but a lot of the cancers which have been linked to firefighting are predominantly through dermal absorption. So the laundering, the effective laundering of our PPE, and as Group Manager alluded to earlier on, the not cross-contaminating between sort of like the fire ground and fire appliances and fire stations, that is key. It's going to involve a huge cultural shift. I also know that Bristol PPE are also feeling the effects of this report, because literally they went from laundering clothes on a infrequent basis to literally after every single time that PPE had been worn. I don't know whether you're experiencing the same sort of PPE shortages down here, because people are actually live to this now, and in the absence of guidance, they were defaulting to, I'm going to wear it once and I'm going to send it away so that I'm safe. But I think until the further research has been done, and the risk of attending a smoke plume in open air might actually be slightly different to smoke in a compartment fire, because of the toxic fire effluents that are in there. But yeah, the risk is being looked at, and that really will be down to the individual FRSs to look at that risk and align their policies and procedures and guidance to that.
Thank you. And Councillor Jacobs.
You said that Avon are doing more than a lot of other stations or areas. Is there a reason for that?
I don't know. I mean, quite a few chief fire officers seem to be in a bit of a holding pattern at the moment, because the NFCC, the National Fire Chiefs Council, haven't actually put out much recommendation or guidance on this. A lot of them are wary of financial constraints, and in views of partnership working and collaboration, sometimes fire and rescue services will wait to see what the neighbouring one is doing, and they will look at the most effective solution, what's working for them, what isn't working for them, and then implement it themselves. So there's probably a raft of reasons why some aren't doing more than others.
Thank you. Matt, would you like to come in?
If I may comment on this, Councillor, the protection of individuals from contaminants and fire is a multifaceted problem, and the solutions are there. I think what we have in Avon is we have a culture that is willing to adopt tactics, equipment and procedures to protect themselves, and there's a willingness of our staff at all levels within operations to engage with that clean process, and one of the biggest controlling factors of this is culture. The culture of making sure you're clean and washing, and the shower and the hour that the union has invested in is a huge step forward. And where we are is we are absolutely supporting our staff from the strategic level downwards, but we've also invested heavily in equipment, and our tactics, the way that we operate on the fire ground, are quite advanced. And those things, when you add that together collectively, our position is getting better. It's not perfect, but it is getting better. And in relation to your question, Councillor, that protection from fire, the equipment that we have, breathe and apparatus, the PPE that we invested, all works. Where it falls down, as my Fire Brigades Union colleague has stated, is down to cleanliness. It's kind of, if we maintain that awareness of being clean and cleaning our equipment and active in that, that's the big change. It's happening.
Thank you. I think that shows some solid progress happening there. Thank you. So the next item is...
So that report was just for noting.
Just for noting, yes, please. And the next item on the agenda is the DICE strategy, and I believe that's Richard coming back to us again.
Thank you, Chair. So since the launch of the DICE strategy in 2019, the DICE team has made some good progress in delivering on the objectives within the strategy itself. Some of those key areas of success have been around building community links and relationships, and we now have over 40 key partner organisations in our database, which it can be used by any department and any staff across the organisation to help them engage better with the community and help as a fire and rescue service do our job better. Again, we continue to work with HR, corporate communications around recruitment, providing them with information on who is in our communities, giving them demographic information, and partaking in community engagement events, discovery days. And that also extends across to our key partners like Bristol City Council, DWP, in supporting them with their recruitment events and just raising awareness of us as an employer of choice. We also continue our networks, being present at our networks, our Bristol Equality Network, Bristol Equality Charter as well, which houses over 30 to 40 key organisations which face similar issues as ourselves as well. So there's a lot of sharing best practice as well in that respect. And around DICE training. So we've just reviewed the e-learning programme, and in the next couple of weeks we'll be launching that as a mandatory piece of training that all staff must complete. That'll give us that base layer of awareness and training around DICE and culture issues. That'll give us the platform then to start really embedding our values and our behaviour framework, and taking on the key recommendations and areas for consideration from the second culture review. Having said that, in the last sort of 12-15 months, we have faced some struggles in terms of the team. The team has consistently fluctuated throughout the sort of period, the 3-year period. And certainly for the last 11 months, it's been a solo effort in terms of delivering against those objectives. However, I do have 2 adverts out at the moment for a DICE officer and a newly created position of a community engagement officer, as I realise that as much work as we've done in the communities, I feel that we could do a lot more. Our work is very much Bristol-centric, having been sort of based in that sort of local area. But I do recognise that the 3 other areas that we serve, we could do a lot more work in those areas as well to improve our reach, our engagement, our understanding about who is vulnerable, who's at risk. So that will be then implemented into the 2022 to 25 strategy, which is in the appendix there as well. Some other key areas of progress around policies. Karen's mentioned the work on the dignity and respect policy, and DICE has inputted heavily on that. Sort of recent formation of the transformation team and their work on policies, DICE has been contributing to that as well as the important development of the combined impact assessment process, which is now digital. And although I don't have sort of figures for measurements, there certainly has been an increase in staff using that method to check whether policies are fair and free of barriers, and continue to make improvements around that. In terms of going forward in what will be sort of featured in the next DICE strategy, there are some areas that we really want to focus on in line with the culture survey results, the HMIC FRS inspections and the internal audit, and those are around bullying, harassment, discrimination and prejudice. And I think that in terms of fire and rescue services and other public sectors, that still is a key issue that it really needs to be addressed, and it's certainly not going to be an overnight success. Some of these behaviours are embedded for a number of decades, and I think we need to really sort of identify what they look like. There's not just one particular set of behaviours, there are multiple behaviours that occur for different reasons, whether something recently, like events such as the Colston statue being taken down, or George Floyd, things like that, all the way back to legacy issues in terms of the profile of our organisation where we recruit from. We are planning, and it's certainly within the objectives in this strategy, some sort of key interventions on stations. Firstly, raising awareness around the importance of embedding DICE and culture, but also the benefits of having a diverse workforce. And I've recently finished the DICE training, a collaborative DICE training with SARI, who we partner with. And we'll be rolling that training, piloting that training to key stations that we know have had issues, key issues. We'll test that training out on those stations, and depending on the feedback and the sort of success with that, we'll be rolling that out on a wider basis. Our key target group is watch managers and crew managers, as in 2020 we covered middle managers. Once we've covered those groups, we'll go back around again, and we'll continue. That'll be a continuous training. That's backed up with the e-learning, which is, as I say, has been reviewed and will be in the next couple of weeks rolled out as a mandatory training for everybody. I have been doing a lot of training with new recruits, so every intake that comes in, I do an hour or so session, and I've done one with Karen as well. That includes control, and just recently, those who are getting promoted from from firefighters to crew managers, I apply training to them as well. So there's a broad spread of awareness raising and training, and we'll continue to make improvements around that as well. Again, in terms of sort of going forward, we'll continue to try to make the organiser or the service a more diverse and inclusive place to work. As we know, it's one thing, creating a diverse workforce. It's whether we include that diversity and celebrate and recognise that diversity. And certainly not have it just at the bottom layer. I think there's some work to be done around talent spotting, creating a talent pool, and encouraging, as we heard earlier, about people not having the confidence to sort of step up into higher roles or going up the ladder. I think there's a lot of work that we can do around that, and that'll be collaboratively work with HR and other departments as well.
Thank you, Richard. I believe Amanda wants to.
I just wanted to clarify something for members. So your recommendations are note the content of the report and the DICE strategy. And your second bullet point in background says the DICE strategy review is complete but not been through a consultation process. So can we just be clear for members what the status of this document is? So is it still in draft, or are you asking members to approve it today? That's what I just need to clarify for members.
So the current state of it at the moment is it is in draft just because it hasn't gone through consultation process with the other departments that are included in this strategy, and I'll be doing collaborative work with. When that is complete, then I'd like to feature it at the next People and Culture Committee for approval and for sign-off.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Thank you.
So thank you for that report, Richard. I'd also like to provide an update. After reading this report, I've worked with the chair and the clerk to suggest that all members of the Fire Authority also get the e-learning DICE training as well, because I think that's really important that we all share a common understanding of the issues involved. So hopefully that'll be happening in the new year.
Thank you.
Any questions from the floor?
Yeah, thank you for that, Richard. It's in terms of building links with community groups outside Bristol. You mentioned the three other authorities, and I recall you and the South African guy, I'm trying to think of his name now, a couple of years back, came down to Western, yeah. And I take what you say about the difficulty with a small number of staff to try and develop that. And I suppose, how do you see that going forward? So, obviously we've got a fair old area to cover. So you've got the city in the middle that is twice the size of most of the other districts, so that takes a lot of the work.
Yeah, I mean, I created another position, the Community Engagement DICE Officer, not yet here, but the idea of that role is that they will be based out in the community for most of their time. And their role will cover working with key community leaders across our 4 service areas, but more importantly, working with fire stations, fire crews, helping them to create a package of community engagement, which then that DICE officer will support them with and monitor and help them improve. So, as you know, Bristol is the kind of epicenter of diversity in the southwest, and any of those other areas will have proportions of that diversity. So, for example, maybe in your area it might be age, it might be abilities, and so we will use demographic data, especially the Census 21 data, to be able to identify where those key areas are, get stations to go and create initiatives that will support or help those identify vulnerability. Another sort of key area as well is that Bristol, being a city of sanctuary, has taken on a lot of refugees over the last sort of 10 years since the last census as well. So I think that definitely will be new emerging communities that we need to know about, need to identify. So this will be the role of that DICE officer. Having said that, we're talking a massive area, for that person to cover. So I will be relying on fire crews to really sort of support, each other really, and that DICE officers to make that happen.
Richard, Councillor Hopkinson.
Yeah, they can't shut me up. Basically, I'd like to say, for some while I was actually doing the Community Engagement Forum in Bradley Stoke, and also I happened to be mayor of Bradley Stoke at one point, and started a cultural thing there where we have a sort of community festival, which was really sort of worked well with lots and lots of different groups. What I did find when I did some research, because you're able to, as a councillor, to actually link in on certain systems which allow you to sort of see where people are living, etc., etc. And we actually had something like 26% of different ethnic people living actually in Bradley Stoke of the whole of South Gloucestershire. So it's quite, we've got Chinese communities, we've got a lot of people from Europe, all over the place, France, everywhere. So it's quite a community. I'm just wondering, as my colleague was saying here, how long is it going to be before you can come out to, get involved with these people as well? Because, and what we try and do as councillors, we try and make sure we've got a fantastic Indian community in Charlton Hayes. Recently, the new Brabazon sort of development there. In fact, Hong Kong people were invited here, and a lot of the wealthier people came in, and they literally bought several roads actually there. So from Hong Kong, it's amazing. We've had some welcome meetings and things, but how long would that be to sort of come and have a look?
So if I can pick up some of that, and Richard might chip in as well. So we have done events in Bradley Stoke, face-to-face events. So they were before the pandemic and the restrictions came in. Unfortunately, they were very poorly attended, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing them again. It was maybe that we didn't get it right. We didn't maybe publicise it as widely as we should. I live in Bradley Stoke, and I'm always really, really keen to get involved and meet with communities on a face-to-face basis. I think what we need to do is we've got a register of 70 community groups. So Richard was talking about some of the key ones that we put more input into because of their maybe diversity-rich communities that they're dealing with in terms of Bristol. But we have contact with over 70 groups, and what we do is every time we recruit, particularly for whole-time firefighters, we send out a community pack and details of those vacancies to all of those community groups, and we ask them if they would like us to be involved in networking with them. So I would just ask a plea that if any of you have community groups that you're working with that we may not be aware of, if you could equally let us know, we would be very, very pleased to get in touch with them and to find out what works for them. Is it part of something in their newsletter? Is it something actually going out and sort of meeting with them in terms of community meetings that they may have on a regular basis? So I think this is definitely an area that we could work really closely on and collaborate.
Richard, did you want to come in?
Yeah. So I think what might help us with that, and what I've kind of struggled with over the last sort of 3 years, is being able to identify where key groups are in your areas. I've kind of mentioned it before, but out of the 4 key areas that we work in, Bristol produces the best data, and I just had a look last week as well, and actually Baines, North Somerset, South Gloucestershire, it's really hard to extract data from then. As we know, we've got the results coming through now for the census 2021, and if I could work, and we sort of did try in the past, didn't we, Richard, in terms of sort of finding, it didn't sort of get anywhere. A key people within your kind of sort of local authorities that I could work closely with, or my community engagement officer can work closely with, to extract that data so then we can make those key engagements as well. But there's just one other point I want to make as well. I know that in terms of Avon Fire and Rescue Service, our underrepresented groups we always highlight as women and Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, but there are other groups as well. Obviously, LGBTQ plus IA, and some in terms of disability as well, and large hidden disability. So there's a lot of work we need to do around that. Identifying those groups are a lot more difficult, and again, it goes back to what we were sort of saying about data collection, monitoring, and things like that, and whether people are willing to give that real data. So there's definitely some work to do around that as well. So yeah, that would be sort of my key sort of areas I'd like to work closely with you.
Thank you, Richard. Ruth, is it quick?
Just to say that you're talking about interaction. Tomorrow morning, I have 2 fire engines coming out with me in my ward, with the police and the ambulance service, and what we do is I'm amazed that all of the residents do come out, so there is interaction. Sure. And it's once a month, and it's fantastic, I have to say. Very quick.
Thank you, Ruth. And thank you, Richard, for your report. I think we're noting that, so duly noted. And the next item is the Statutory Finance Officer item, which I believe the clerk is presenting.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a report which was actually prepared by myself and the Chief Fire Officer, Simon Shilton, but he can't be here today, so I'm presenting the report. So it's just really to get the committee's approval of the recruitment of the post of Statutory Finance Officer. So the recommendations are that you endorse the advertisement and job description for the role of Statutory Finance Officer, which, following approval of those documents by members of this committee by email, was publicised. And there's a slight amendment there. It was actually on Monday, the 5th of December. It was the documents were finalised on the 1st, but unfortunately we couldn't get access to the correct website to upload them until Monday the 5th. And the second recommendation is to ask the committee to note and approve the proposed recruitment process and timeline. So you will recall, members, that at your last meeting on the 5th of October, you were informed that to cover sickness absence, the Chief Fire Officer had made an interim appointment of an interim treasurer, and that was under his scheme of delegation, and that was for a period of 6 months up to the 21st of March next year. You kindly ratified that appointment at your meeting, and you also delegated authority to the Chief to slightly increase that appointment in terms of timescale, if necessary, and that will depend on the outcome of this recruitment process. So at that same meeting on the 5th of October, we did sadly receive the resignation of the current Treasurer, so she will be leaving us with effect from the 31st of December. So in the light of this development in October, you kindly agreed that we should press ahead with the recruitment process, and you recommended to the Fire Authority meeting that day that they determine under the Officer Employment Procedure Rules that we should undertake a recruitment process and then delegate that process to this committee to complete. So I raised an urgent item with the Fire Authority that afternoon on the 5th of October, and thankfully they agreed with you, so we were given the go-ahead to begin the recruitment process. It was also decided not to delay waiting until this meeting to put the advert out, which is why you very kindly, and I'm very grateful, agreed to receive the 2 documents from me by email, and they were approved by email. So thank you very much for that. And those are appendix to this paper. Financial implications are the same as before, so you set a pay policy statement every year. The statutory officer's working pattern equates to roughly a 3.5-day working week because there's some flexibility in how the hours are worked, and the statutory officers receive a percentage of the Chief Fire Officer's pay pro rata for part-time hours, okay? So in terms of key things for you to note, I don't think I need to go over a lot of the key considerations. Just suffice it to say the selection process and timeline is set out at 5.3. So advertising went live on the 5th of December, and that's closing on the 3rd of January. The thought process behind that is 1 month should be enough, but also people tend to look for jobs when they're bored over Christmas. So the idea is that hopefully people will be internet surfing on their sofas, so they might find this job advert and pull together an application for it. Shortlisting by elected members will take place on the 18th of January, and thank you for those of you who've confirmed that you can do that on the 18th of January. The same members have to then do the interviews and presentations, which are now fixed for Monday the 30th of January, and that will be a live interview and presentation. So I don't think there's anything else I wanted to cover. So happy to take any questions before we go to the recommendations.
Any questions from the floor? No, then I move that we should note this report.
No, you're asked to endorse the
Endorse it,
advertisement and job description, which are appendix to the report, and also note and approve the proposed recruitment process and timeline.
Do we need to vote on that?
Yes, you do.
So I'd like to propose a vote then. So all votes.
So who you're proposing? Who's seconding?
Yep. Don seconding.
Okay, thank you.
And all votes against. All votes abstaining. All votes for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes that item. So the next thing is the date of the next meeting, which I move is Friday the 3rd of March 2023 at 10:30, probably here. Friday the 3rd of March. We don't need to vote on that, do we? No. And so thank you very much all for attending, and now I'd like to propose that we resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following items on the business on the grounds that they contain exempt information pursuant to Schedule 12A, Part 1 of the Local Government Act 1972, and in accordance with Schedule 12A, Part 2, Paragraph 10 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Can I have a proposer and seconder, please? Don to propose, and Ruth to second. All votes against, all votes abstaining, all votes for. Thank you very much.